Thank you so much for joining us here on the Clan Chattan Association YouTube channel. We have a very special guest, the one and only Philip Beddows of Clan MacBean. He is the Clan MacBean Seanachaidh. I'm hoping I said that as accurately as possible.
Very good, Cindi. Very good indeed.
And I'm so excited to have you on because I don't know that any of the other Clan Chattan Association clans have a historian, if that's proper to say. And you have so much knowledge and information and historical information. And of course, we are spotlighting Clan MacBean. And you're the most important person next to Richard MacBean of MacBean to have come on and talk to the viewers about your clan and about what you do and your role. Welcome, Philip.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Cindi. Very nice to be speaking to you all the way across the Atlantic and across the Americas.
I feel that it's very important. First of all, not everybody wants to see me on all of these, so we'll be down the road. We'll get other people just coming on, feeling more comfortable. There's so much information across the internet and even in printed books that is inaccurate and incorrect. And I just wanted you to maybe touch on that a little bit so our viewers can understand, kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to share a history of Clan Chattan Association and all of the major clans, Clan MacBean. But it's difficult sometimes for us to know where to go to get the authoritative voice of the history. And you're the only person I can think of that would absolutely know that I could know, okay, he's going to have the answer or he'll find it and it'll be the correct one. Can you tell us a little bit about your role as this?
Okay. So, yes, Richard MacBean of MacBean, who's our clan chief, honored me by making me by appointing me as Seanachaidh. And Seanachaidh is an old, ancient office in the clan. It was one of the most important members of the chief's household, along with his piper, of course, and his standard bearer, and his sword bearer, and the like. But the Seanachaidh is a bit like the clan bard, the clan historian, the expert on, most importantly, probably the pedigree of the chiefly line in particular. So, for instance, when we were together, Cindi, two summers ago in August 2022, I was there having to organise the inauguration of Richard as our new chief in succession to his father, and had to give his genealogy back to the 13th century in Gaelic. And then I was allowed to do it in English, so that it could be confirmed in public view that Richard was indeed the correct person and the right and proper successor as chief to his father. And the Lord Lyon was there to oversee everything as a representative of then the late Queen Elizabeth. So that the Seanachaidh was very important from that point of view, because he was the genealogist of the clan. But as I say, the history, the stories, the spirit of the clan, as someone's often calls it, William Shaw of Easterlair, who used to be a Seanachaidh to the previous chief of Shaw, the keeper of the flame, I think is the phrase he talks of, being a Seanachaidh. So it was always very important. And so something of a bard, something of a historian, a genealogist, and also someone who was knowledgeable about heraldry as well, because that's very important in Scotland.
As I'm posting different coats of arms, and you can attest to this, not always accurate and need to make corrections. People make comments, oh, that's the McIntosh coat of arms. A coat of arms belongs to a specific person, correct? And
yes, that's it. That's a big mistake a lot of people make. In Scotland, it's the only still working heraldic court in the world. Is the court of the Lord Lyon in Edinburgh, and it is an actual law court. And as we know, there are some people that have assumed arms or made some error in presenting it, rather like I suppose, a logo of a corporate body, and that's actually illegal. So the key thing is that a coat of arms is the personal property of a single individual. So it's not there's no family coat of arms, and therefore the chief is the chief of the name of the clan, and is matriculated to bear the undifferenced arms of the chief of that clan. Now, behind you, on your screen, you've got the crest badge of the clan, and that's what clans men and women can wear. So that's the crest of the chief, surrounded by a belt with the motto around it, and that's traditionally what clansfolk would wear on their bonnets, or their as a brooch on a jacket or a dress or whatever, if you're a lady.
and I've got this one right here.
That's a lovely one. Yes.
And I do
Yeah.
understand you were sharing with me a little earlier, and the coloring is also very important. And so this actually needs to have blue in between the yellow. And so we will correct that.
Yes. So the MacBean chiefs have their wreath under the crest is yellow and blue, which are the colours of Clan Chattan, because they are of the blood of Clan Chattan, one of the original clans. And the McIntosh chiefs have red and yellow. And the clans that branch off from the original McIntosh line, the Shaws, the Farquharsons, they have red and yellow too. So those little colour differences tell you from which bit of Clan Chattan some of these clans come from.
This good to know. I mean, after 22 years of doing what I do, as I always say on this channel, I learn new things all the time, and I'm very happy to learn. And I'm so happy you're here sharing that with everyone. We had the Lord Lyon at the Clan Chattan Association AGM a few years back before the pandemic explain heraldry and coats of arms.
The chief will have the identical coat of arms to the predecessor chiefs. So the chief's arms don't change. But I mean, the design, the look of the wildcat, for instance, looking at the crest behind you, that might be shown slightly differently, but that's artistic license. But the fact that the wildcat is facing in the direction it is, that it's holding a shield, that the shield is red, the wreath is a certain color, that those remain the same. But the branches where there are other people who bear arms, and the Macphersons in particular have a large number of people, heads of their branches of the clan, who have registered arms, and they will be always slightly similar to the chief, because they'd be treated as cadets, or they might be actually literal cadets, son of a younger son of a younger son of a chief. And there are all sorts of very complicated rules to show how those differences occur in each generation, depending on how, which number son you are of a father, or whether you're the daughter or whatever, so that you will always know exactly whose arms those are. All the chiefs of the clans of Clan Chattan, there was a very important date in 1672 when, first of all, the McIntosh, as captain of Clan Chattan, was granted a particular set of arms, which is the arms they have now. Although, there've been a few changes because of heiresses in the family, so slight changes. That's where the changes might happen, Cindi, where you've married an heiress and you add something of her arms for your children. But each of the heads of each of the clans at that time were granted their arms on the basis of them being heraldic cadets of McIntosh as captain of Clan Chattan. So very similar emblems appear in all of the chief's arms. So you can see that there's a connection between them all. It's quite complicated. We can have a whole program on this.
And maybe we will one day. I wished I had recorded the Lord Lyon and his presentation that evening at the AGM. That was phenomenal, and I learned quite a bit. But I felt like, you know, it just had more. I had more questions after. It's intricate, and so I certainly appreciate persons such as yourself who recognize these things and can give a proper explanation of some, just to let people know, because I don't think people know, especially us Americans over here that aren't familiar and don't know heraldry. So thank you for that. And that kind of segues into, you know, some of the reference books that, you know, I use, that I've shared with you. The Manuscripts of Clan Chattan by Charles Fraser McIntosh. I use the Kenrara. I have another book here, the Clan MacIntosh and the Clan Chattan by Mrs. McIntosh of McIntosh. Margaret McIntosh had written book. And then also we have the journals that are online. And, you know, we were chatting a bit about how some of these have still some inaccuracies. And
so yeah. Well, and there's the other great Clan Chattan historian was often called his initials A.M. McIntosh. Confusingly, he first of all wrote under the name Alexander McIntosh Shaw, and then later he changed his name Shaw, so he was Alexander McIntosh, very confusingly, so just known as A.M. McIntosh. And he and Charles Fraser McIntosh were writing around the same time. So A.M. McIntosh wrote a 1903 book, the Macintoshes and Clan Chattan, and that was an update on an earlier work he'd done, which was sort of had quite a few errors in, which he admitted to in the next edition. But even so, we found that there's been quite a lot of history we've had to update and correct. We've even had to change the line of succession without any fundamental change to the chiefs, because we had one brother as having become chief, and then his nephew, well, actually no, that elder brother who left no heir to become chief, he actually died before his father, so it was impossible for him to become chief. But because of a bit of confusion over the history, Charles Fraser McIntosh and A.M. McIntosh both assumed this son had been chief, but he hadn't. He'd died years before, and in fact, it was his younger brother who became chief when their father died, and it was that man that led the clan at Chattan.
Wow, and see, I would never have known that.
So we're constantly correcting things. And that there's still quite a lot of work to do, and that's because different historians have put slightly different perspective on some of the sources, and there are sources we found which no one appears ever to have seen before.
Tell us about some of those sources and how you found them and where they turned up. And I ask because this seems to be a constant theme, talking with people from the individual clans of the association. and what a work, will eventually need to be done in cross-referencing and really working on it to get it right and get all of the information and get it correct.
Yeah, yeah. No, well, it's interesting enough. There's a very old manuscript which has some, probably the oldest Clan Chattan genealogies going back to, well, going back to at least the 13th century, and that's the 1467 manuscript, and a very well known to those who know him, academic Ronald Black and his wife have been busy transcribing the 1467 manuscript, and this had been transcribed or in part by others in the past, even Skene, who's a well-known author and about 100 years ago or more. But this actually has challenged some of the genealogies of Clan Chattan, and it actually shows the McIntoshes as and where they fit in, which is really fascinating. But whether that is in itself correct is another question, because it doesn't necessarily attune to other genealogies that are almost as old. And of course, we have in the Kinrara manuscript, which was written by Lachlan McIntosh of Kinrara, hence being called the Kinrara manuscript, that was written in the late 1600s. And he was using as sources documents which have since been lost. But what I was looking at the other day is the Far manuscript, which is full of rich data, and that's in the National Records in Edinburgh. And that actually has some details of Clan MacBean, which include a few stories which are unmistakably oral tradition written down, and probably written down by from a story from the Seanachaidhs of old, because it tells, for instance, of a fight in the early 1300s between the Commons and members of Clan MacBean, and it tells with intricate detail what happened in this fight, who came up behind somebody else, how one axe struck another axe and got stuck in it, and formed the shape of a cross, so that when the MacBeans then appeared to McIntosh, that these axes were stuck together. I should go back. This is the sons, the original founder of the clan, the patriarch, the original Bain, or Behan, as he would have been in Gaelic, Behan Moore, Great Bain, Big Bain, obviously a big man, and he had a son called Mulmurra, whose name is anglicised as Milmore. So and Mulmurra MacBean, as he was, son of Bain, he and his sons were great supporters with the McIntosh of Robert the Bruce. And of course, their deadly enemies were the Comyn family, who were at Inverlochy and held the castle there. And the Comyns and the McIntoshes were at each other's throats. And the MacBeans were particularly hated because they were amongst the strongest supporters of the McIntosh in his support for Robert the Bruce. So the Commons were busy battling with the MacBeans and stirring up trouble against them. And anyway, this fight happens after Robert the Bruce had killed the Red Comyn, John Comyn of Badenoch, and the steward of Inverlochy Castle was killed by the MacBeans, by the sons of Mulmurra, and then they kill some of this steward's servants, and this is where this fight takes place. And this account is in the Farm manuscript, and so they they have this intricate sort of dance fight around there, and down in Loch Arbor, where the Clan Chattan and the MacBeans originated, and then they turn up to McIntosh, and it said that McIntosh was saying, "What on earth have you got on your back? What's that?" You know, that, and these axes stuck together, one obviously split into the wood of the other, forming the shape of a cross. And so so they get this nickname that that they are the lineage of Bane of the cross, or something like that, or the kindred of Bane of the cross, which is a very ancient story. And so that manuscript has never been referred to by any Clan Chattan historian in relation to the MacBeans. No detail from it. But what we do get is we get snippets of that story about the MacBeans at the time and their fights with the Commons and their killing of the Red Commons steward of Inverlochy and his servants, and the way they came to McIntosh, and that's included in the Kinrara manuscript, and that's picked up by others and slightly retold, and so bits are put together. But you can see from the Kinrara manuscript that clearly that there was, you know, some absolute treasured histories that have been lost to posterity, which detail in great detail, you know, even the year that that the McIntosh married the heiress of Clan Chattan, as Eva, as we know. And some people say that Eva didn't exist. There's no historical proof, and this, that, and the other. But actually, I'm an absolute supporter of the existence of Eva, because it was with Eva's wedding party that Bane first came.
Yes,
So
I read about that.
he was a kinsman of hers, and that's why there was such a close association with the McIntoshes from that early date, because when they married Eva, I think it was 1291 or thereabouts, it was Bane that came in her wedding party and settled alongside the McIntoshes.
It would be extraordinary, not to put you on the spot, but for you and I to come on from time to time and go over the Kinrara, and if we can get a copy of the Farr manuscript, I don't know if you have a copy, and just kind of go over some of these details beginning to end. You know, obviously we couldn't do it in one sit down, one segment, but just make a discussion of them. It's absolutely, not to overuse the word fascinating, because I always do, but it is truly fascinating to read through that, which I've never seen the Farr manuscript, so this is all that I really have to
Well, it's
look.
never been published. It's in a series of bits of paper, all handwritten. It's never been published. It's never been pulled together in any coherent way, and it takes quite a lot to go through. So there are hundreds and hundreds of pages of it, dealing with, you know, the McIntoshes, the McGillivrys, the MacBeans, the Shaws. You know, I mean, it's a great resource. So that, you know, that would be a great project actually for Clan Chattan Association, having republished published the Kinrara manuscript. That would be another great project.
Well, we should plant a seed, Philip. Plant a seed and get that done.
Yeah.
And just along that lines, one more, and then we can talk a little bit more about MacBean, if you'd like, and some specific information and historical dates you have, as well as the one you did. And I had heard about the cross, the axis being crossed, and I remember, actually, I spoke with Ray about this, and we were wondering if it was in fact a true story. So it sounds like that it is, for sure, and that's very fascinating that that is true. And then well, the Kinrara, just a quick question to you and some thoughts. We had, you know, heard historically that the Scots spoke Gaelic, and you know Gaelic. You know some Gaelic at least, because you were able to recite the lineage of Richard MacBean of MacBean during his inauguration. And by the way, everyone, I will link that video below. We do have that here on our site. That was an extraordinary production that you did, and it was amazing just to be there and experience that. I don't know if I'll ever experience something like that in my lifetime again. Going back to the Kinrara, how it's written, and you think, okay, well, the Scots spoke mainly Gaelic up until, as I understand it, the Culloden battle, and then it was outlawed. But this Kinrara is written, it's written mostly in English. Now, I will say that it's phonetic, a lot of it. Like, you really have to pay attention through the centuries. Things are spelled a little bit differently. Words, common words, are spelled differently, but phonetically they read as they should. So some derivative of Latin, I'm not sure, but it is written, and I don't know if it's just that it's been translated over the centuries.
Oh, well, there were two versions. There's an English version. I think I'm right in saying the English version of the Kinrara is the oldest, and it was also done in Latin, because of course Latin was the language of still. And I mean, in a way, it seems a little bit strange that Kinrara wrote it in Latin in the late 1600s, but there we go. It could be that he did so because some of his source material was in Latin. That might be. I've only just thought of that, actually, Cindi. I hadn't thought about that before. So he might have thought, I've got a lot of this material already written in Latin from these other sources, which we've since lost. So why don't I'll do a version in Latin. But I think the English one is older. Forgive me if I've got that the wrong way around. But no, it was the Highlanders. In the Highlands, they spoke Gaelic. The Lowlanders did not speak Gaelic. They spoke English or a dialect of Scots. But actually, in reality, the educated folk up in the Highlands would have spoken perfect English and used Gaelic and English, depending on who they were speaking with. So, it was very, very difficult. And you can see from the writing and from documents that are written that, they wrote legal documents all in English and very, very clearly written, hopefully sometimes, and all the parish registers, things like that. So, but you did have, but people were speaking Gaelic. I mean, people, for instance, up in Inverness-shire and members of Clan Chattan, they didn't adopt surnames till the sort of middle of the 1600s. The chiefs of the MacBeans are not found with the name MacBean on the early bands of union of Clan Chattan. They're found with their patronymics. And in 1609, you've got several MacBeans mentioned, but they're not MacBeans. They're members of other clans who just happen to have fathers called Bain. So their name was so-and-so MacBean. If you want to find the chief of Clan MacBean, you'll find him. He's there as Angus MacPhail, son of Paul, because that was his father's name.
Because Mac is son of, we were having this discussion, John McFall, and was trying to explain, in the history of Clan MacPhail, same thing. And he surmised that people started using a surname when taxation came into play. They had to, when we started to be taxed in some way, shape, or form, or held accountable for paying some type of money, then people took on surnames at that point, that juncture. Not sure.
I don't know. I mean, I know in Wales they started taking on surnames earlier in the 1500s, or round about the sort of turn of the 1500s, something like that. And I remember hearing an amusing anecdote that, because rather like the Scots, actually, the importance was your genealogy back a certain number of generations. So in courts of law, a judge would come along and say, "What is your name?" And someone would give their name back 7 generations. So one judge apparently said, "Look, I'm wasting a huge amount of time just asking people their names. So I'm not going to accept that anymore. So you've got to have a surname now." So, something like that. But in Scotland, it just seemed to be around that time, the sort of middle of the 1600s. Could have just been, I think, administratively, that was helpful. But interesting that people then took on the clan name if they were members of the clan. And of course, members of the clan were those descended from the original lineages through the male line, but they were also people who had no blood relationship to the clan at all, but who happened to be the retainers, the tenants, those protected or married into the clan, and they adopted surnames, which is why people find their DNA can be confusing, because they think, "Oh, I don't have if it's a male DNA, which goes father to son, they think I'm not matching anybody, therefore do I belong?" Well, it's probably because your ancestor actually wasn't originally a male line MacBean. It's just you adopted the surname because you got adopted into the clan for whatever reason.
Well, and if you wore the tartan, right, and you would, if you were under that protection or living nearby, you would be wearing that tartan. And so that seems to me like that would be a natural progression for people taking on a surname, and here they are wearing the tartan, have this association.
Although the surnames came first, because Clan tartans didn't exist properly until the 19th century.
That was going to be my next question for you. So is that in the coloring of the clan tartan, or actually?
No, just the idea of a clan tartan. So, for instance, the McIntosh tartan, which the oldest MacBean tartan was found, an old piece was found or preserved, I think is a better word, that continued to be preserved in Tomartin House, where the MacBeans of Tomartin lived. And that's like McIntosh with one extra line, and it's what the MacBean hunting tartan is based on. That McIntosh and MacBean of Tomartin, called of Tomartin because that's where it survived. And tartans generally followed a pattern that local weavers made. So there's lots of tartans that are very similar to McIntosh down in Lochaber and Badenoch. And so there's some sort of connection historically, rather like crests and heraldry. You can see a connection between where people come from based upon some of their tartans. But it was the Victorians that really took this forward, and the Sobieski brothers, who were pretend Stuarts, descendants of Bonnie Prince Charlie, who were total frauds, but they pretended to be his descendants, and said they had some ancient book, with all these tartans, which they totally invented. So some of them, they had a few which were authentic, yes, absolutely, but the otherwise, invented things. And then everyone wanted when there was the great King's visit to Edinburgh, run by Walter Scott, the King's Jaunt, as they call it. Everybody wanted to be in their clan tartan to turn up to see the king, and so it was sort of Walter Scott, and then the tartan trade got onto it, and one thing led to another, and tartans appeared all over the place. But they're a wonderfully powerful symbol. There's a likelihood that clan regiments at Culloden might very well have been kitted out in the same pattern, whatever material happened to be available, so that they looked like a consistent regiment. Because we know at that time the Highland companies, the Black Watch, were already wearing a standard tartan.
And here's the modern.
There we are.
One of the
there we are. Yeah. So you can see on my tie, you can see that sort of pattern of Mackintosh with various MacBean differences, but there's a sort of, there's an underlying pattern.
Oh yes, the white striping in your tie.
Yes, the white stripe instead of the blue. And then where the original MacBean and Tomartin tartan had this stripe, which is yellow here, through what's your main red ground there, now green on the hunting tartan. But that is also in the MacBean dress tartan, as a Mackintosh stripe, as they call it. So we, but these things are quite important. The shore of the red tartan of Tordarroch, that is a Mackintosh pattern with another stripe through the main red ground. The McGillivray is another variation from Mackintosh, and even the hunting Macpherson. You can see some similarities. And Jamie Scarlett, who was the author of the Tartans of Clan Chattan, who died, quite some years ago now, but he was a great expert on tartan. He did some fantastic work, and now Scotland is lucky to have Peter MacDonald, Colonel Peter MacDonald, who is really probably the greatest expert on tartan in, dare I make him blush, in the world. I mean, there's no one that knows so much as he does about tartan. And actually, Clan MacBean, of course, was the very first clan to have its tartan taken to the surface of the moon.
Yes. Yes, and that's also in the link below. You'll hear a little bit about that, but yes, flown over the moon. That's very fascinating information.
Yeah.
And there's a memorial on the banks of Loch Ness. Is that, am I correct in saying exactly?
Yes, just above Dawes, the village of Dawes, on Loch Ness. There's the MacBean Memorial Park, and there was a wonderful memorial put up to the clan and its chiefs by our current chief Richard's grandfather, Houston MacBean and MacBean, and he built this wonderful MacBean Memorial Park on a patch of land he was able to buy back in the old clan lands, and put a lovely memorial there overlooking Loch Ness. And when we inaugurated Richard with you there, Cindi, we also dedicated a new memorial to Alan Bean, as spelt Bain, B-E-A-N, but pronounced Bean by that side of the family. And he was the fourth person to walk on the moon, and he took a piece of MacBean tartan to the surface of the moon and brought it back again. Some people think there's a flag flying out there still stuck in the ground, flying the tartan flag, but it's not. He brought it all back with him.
It would be fun to see if one day if somebody lands on the moon again and stumbles across it. That would be so fun. Where's that piece of fabric now? Do you know?
He divided it up, and he gave a piece to the clan. He gave a piece to St. Bain's Chapel, what's spelled St. Bean's Chapel, in Perthshire, and there were a couple of other bits that he split up, and people were very lucky to get copies of it. So that was very special. But that was quite a unique moment. Tartan going out there into the galaxy and reaching the moon for the first time.
To the moon. I know we have in the McIntosh Museum, we have a piece of tartan that flew over the U.S. Pentagon, but not on the moon. So that's quite a feat. I really, really would enjoy, coming on here with you as often as you are able and willing, and going over the history. People seem to want that history more than anything. And as I say, we were talking before, it's difficult to know where to go to get the proper information, because there is so much out there on the internet, and in a lot of Americans or people around the world. I shouldn't just pound on my own country, but we rely upon Wikipedia. That must be the place to go where we can get accurate information, and that answer would be no, that is not correct. And most of it is not correct. And so
Well, bit by bit, we've been sharing research as it appears, and just currently working on an updated pedigree of the chiefs, because there was an old genealogy done many decades ago, more than 70, about 65 years ago, and that was just some genealogists who mixed up line of succession with actual line of descent. So they had people with the wrong children, and that was picked up by all sorts of publications. And but actually, so there's been some important corrections to make to that, and old papers which we've been going through, and working with some other great MacBean clan researchers, and that's important, so that we can have. That's why it was important to have the lineage properly done.
Richard MacBean of MacBean is in fact the hereditary chief of Clan.
Yes, yes. So we and the in the early 1700s, the chief was William MacBean of Kinhyle, which is just near the village of Dawes, on the way to Inverness, and that the house is still there, or rebuilt from the original house. And so the MacBean chiefs were known as they had a territorial designation of Kinhyle, rather like the chiefs of Farquharson are known as of Invercold, and the Macphersons, are known as of Cluny. So they were of Kinhyle, but Kinhyle was lost, and that William MacBean had 5 sons. The eldest, Aeneas, or Angus. Aeneas and Angus are interchangeable, same name, different formations, and he died young. He was dead by the end of 1722, and his next oldest brother was Gillies More, big Gillies, and he was the chief that led the clan second in command of Lady Anne McIntosh's regiment, and his cousin Alexander McGillivray was the colonel of the regiment, and they both died in the battle. And Gillies was famous as having killed 13 or 14 men with his sword, with his back against a wall on the retreat. But he was incredibly, Cumberland had him. This is something which has not appeared in histories, but is something actually from family papers. Cumberland actually had his body leant up against a wall and measured, because he was said to be the tallest man in the Jacobite army, and he was 6'4" and 1/4 inches.
Oh my goodness!
And Cumberland was so impressed that, despite the fact that Gillies' son Donald was also at the battle, fighting alongside his father, he survived, was captured, but Cumberland bought him a commission in the British Army, and he joined along with a whole lot of cousins who were part of Clan Chattan, and they all joined the British Army. He ended up in Fraser's Highlanders in Canada and fought there, was injured in front of Quebec, the Battle of Quebec there, finally found his way back home, and left 2 daughters. So his next 2 uncles had also died by them without heirs, and so the line of succession went through the 5th and youngest of William MacBean of Kinhyle's sons, John MacBean, and that's the ancestor of the current chief. And his grandson William had migrated down to Macpherson territory, down in Badenoch, in the parish of Alvey, and he went with his brother to Glengarry in Ontario, where a lot of Highlanders settled, and that brought the chiefly line over to Canada. And it wasn't until Houston MacBean, the grandfather of the current chief, that our chief Houston was the first to be born in the United States, in Grand Rapids, no less.
Oh my goodness. I'm so glad you shared that information because I don't think that that is very well known. I wasn't sure if they came over and stayed after Culloden, and if that's why they came to Canada first. So thank you for that clarification. Did they lose their lands at the time of Culloden?
Well, actually, it quite complicated, Cindi, because actually in the run up to the family had, a lot of MacBeans and a lot of Clan Chattan had been in the 1715 rising, and the clan's regiment was captured at Preston. There was a siege of Preston, and they ended up having to surrender after a battle there. And a lot of the heirs of some of the chiefs were then taken down, imprisoned, and some of them, like the MacBeans and the Shaws and others, ended up down in Newgate Prison in London. And because they had powerful cousins who were on the government side, for instance, the Forbes of Culloden and the Campbells of Corder were actually related to the MacGillivray, the Shaw, and the MacBean chiefs. And they agitated to get these people released, which they were. And so Aeneas, they were all sort of, all the senior members of these clans were officers in the regiment. But following that rising, there was a depression in the Highlands. So by the time of the Jacobite rising in 45, a lot of them were not in a very good way financially. And it was a bit of that played its part in getting them to rise, because in a way they didn't have quite so much to lose and they had potentially something to gain, and that just played its part. But of course, a whole lot of them were also serving in the Scottish, regiments in Europe, because there was a big 7 Years' War going on. So the Battle of Culloden actually was just it was a chapter in a much bigger European war. And Cumberland had been over fighting, with Scots in Europe. And so, he brought those soldiers, a lot of them, back over to fight the Jacobites, and he was fighting his own cousin, and they were both fighting for their father to be on the throne of Great Britain. So it was a sort of a family war. It was a Highland against Lowland war, and as I say, just a subsect of a bigger European conflagration. But it was, so they were in a bad way, and Kinhile was actually mortgaged. The chief's home was mortgaged, and the man that held the mortgage at the time was the chief of Clan MacGillivray, who was related to the MacBean chiefs. And the chief commanding at Culloden, his father actually died at the MacBean's chief's home in 1740. And so everything was rather up in the air, because no sooner as he died, and then William MacBean had died, that then their sons died. So the estates were all up in the air, and it literally took about 15 years to sort all of that out. But they never went back to Kinhile, and the problem is that the retreat went through a lot of the MacBean and Clan Chattan lands. So the MacBeans of Fairley, they had Cumberland's army sitting right on their doorstep, crossing the Nairn, right by their house after the battle. So you can imagine a lot of things were a lot of their livestock were all taken. Kinhile the same. They then went down that way. And years later, those that survived were in a pretty poor way. But you could see a lot of them were really supporting each other, whether they were on the government side or not. There was a lot of, close family helping each other to recover from all of this. And ironically, it was one of the Forbes of Culloden, a relation of the MacBean chiefs, and as I say, the Shaws and the MacGillivray chiefs, who erected the memorial, the cairn of the clans on Culloden battlefield. And that memorial was then, was put up by a relation to his Jacobite kinsman, despite the fact at the time his forebear and earlier Duncan Forbes of Culloden was a thoroughly government Hanoverian supporting man and became Lord President. And his Jacobite rebellious cousins were on the other side, across the moor fighting.
And I think this is the story more often than not. And I think a lot of times we think that it was just the English, but it wasn't. And I wonder if a lot of the Scots and clan members, they were just trying to survive. They'd been through the 1715. They maybe some, I can only surmise or think that maybe some felt after that event, that first uprising. I don't know how you view it, but I look at that century as being perhaps the most tumultuous, not just with the 7 Years' Wars, but you had both uprisings. And then you had the Highland clearances. You had the banning of wearing the tartan, playing the bagpipes from 1746 all the way to 1785 in the Disarm Act. And so it was perhaps the most tumultuous and also changing century for Scotland. It just changed absolutely everything from beginning to end of what Scotland was and what it became.
Well, it was, I think probably the old system was already under stress before the 1745 rising. I suspect that's probably true. And I think that Culloden really was the end of it. The end, the nothing was the same again after that. But the feelings, the connections, the feeling of togetherness of the clans of Clan Chattan, that wasn't lost because they were together signing bans and agreements together, and even a very, very, very early Clan Chattan Association was being started even in the 1700s. And the banning of tartan wasn't and kilts and whatever, that wasn't actually completely across the board, because all the Highland regiments were wearing kilts, and that kept the whole culture alive, really, the Highland regiments. But also you've got people being painted, well-known sort of, figures and leading figures in society, having themselves painted, wearing tartan, armed, and pictures of their pipers. These things were happening when supposedly it was banned. So even Campbell of Corder got painted with his great big kilt and tartan all over his, all sorts of bits of tartan jackets and waistcoat, and so I think that it wasn't completely, but the fact of the matter is people were arrested and they were prosecuted for being found in Highland dress. But some people got away with it, and in the military it continued, and that was absolutely vital. So the Highlanders who joined the British Army had already been in the British Army before the 45 rising, even before the 15 rising. So they went out to Canada, and I think that was the migration of people to the cities, to the lowlands, to Edinburgh, to Glasgow. All of those things started to really change life. But the Highlanders going to North America literally changed the world, because they helped to defeat the French. That brought about the creation of Canada. They obviously, amusingly, of course, the Highlanders were heavily involved in fighting against the rebellious Americans. So that the whole thing was reversed. I mean, it's not as simple as this, but you almost found lowlanders in the American colonies fighting for independence, yes, and the Highlanders fighting in the British Army.
Well,
whereas at Culloden, you found the opposite.
Exact opposite.
So, but of course, then you've got the loyalists, who a lot of them then went up into Canada, and particularly in Ontario, and that expanded the Highland population in Canada. But but America and Canada, they wouldn't have become what they became if it wasn't for the Scots that went there. And of course, after the 15, there were loads of Highlanders that were transported to Virginia and the Carolinas in particular, among them many MacBeans
Yes.
and McIntoshes.
Yes.
And they were there when the next lot were transported. So those lines were very important, and the history of course of North America changed the world again.
My own ancestor came across during the Revolutionary War and was fighting with the British. He was a surgeon, as I understand it, and he was captured by the Americans, but because he was a surgeon, they had him complete surgeries on their wounded. And that's how his immigration came about. And I know there's a McIntosh County in Georgia. All throughout the South, you see remnants of the Scottish culture. You hear it in the music. You see it in the dance. Americans are fascinated with their Scottish ancestry and their history. And there's so many people here. We tried to guess with the Scottish government a couple years back when I was working on another project that there might be some 40 million of the diaspora that wound up here in the continental United States. It's hard to know for sure, but there certainly is the enthusiasm and people wanting to know the history and wanting to learn. And so again, I just want to thank you so very much, Philip, for being on with me. This has been utterly fascinating, and I hope you'll come back, as regularly as you can come on with me, because I
Sure.
think we have so much to learn from you, of your knowledge and expertise. And I'm just personally very grateful for your time and your willingness. And I hopefully, over time, this will get out to many people and they'll be able to learn things that they didn't know before.
Well, it's been great, and I think it's great you're doing this, Cindi, and I think Clan Chattan is, as we know, and those that are listening to this that might not know, it's a completely unique confederation of clans, and it's something to treasure and nurture, because it is so special. The clan of the cats, the wildcats. That we all need to stay together in Clan Chattan and keep that historical thread going, to keep it rooted to the original root, but relevant and evolve to be relevant in the modern day as it's done over the centuries. But we just need to keep that going.
Yes, and we will. And one last quick question. I don't know if you know the answer. Oftentimes you hear that the Clan Chattan, what was Confederation, now Association, is it the only of its kind found in Scotland and in Scottish history? Are there others that sort of banded together as well, to your knowledge?
It's unique historically as the only confederation of Highland clans in history. And the incredible thing is that they share this common root. There are those that share the original sort of bloodlines of Clan Chattan, but others then joined, usually through marriage or some other way. But not to divert onto another topic, but it'd be worth the conversation another time, is there was a much older Clan Chattan that actually involved some clans that still exist today, but are not part of Clan Chattan. And primary among them were the Camerons, who were part of it's quite a complicated history, but you ought to have Graham Mackenzie on talking about this and Gillicat's posterity. But the Camerons, the McMartins, and the McGillanes and the Macmillans, that, you know, they were all actually part of and connected to the original ancient Clan Chattan. And it was then the big 300-year battle in Loch Arbor between the Camerons and the McIntoshes goes back to that origin. And so the McIntosh married the heiress, took charge of Clan Chattan, but there was some Camerons who challenged that, and that led to this 300-year plus battle between them for control of the lands in Loch Arbor.
Yes, and the castle there, as the McIntosh had gone down into, as I understand, the Inverness area for protection from the Lord of the Isles at that time for a short period of time, and the Camerons moved in. And
but so they were kinsmen. They were kinsmen. They were our kinsmen. But that's a story for another day. But it goes way back.
We'll have to delve into that, because that'll be fascinating, because I believe the feud between the Camerons and the McIntoshes was the longest running in Scottish history, as I understand.
It's the longest running, yes, absolutely. And to think its origins go back to the 13th century.
That's quite incredible. We will have to come back on and talk about that as well. Philip, again, thank you so much for your time, your vast knowledge, all the information, and thank you. What a treasure.
It's a pleasure, Cindi.
You're
all right.
A pleasure to the association. Thank you. And thank you for always being supportive.
Okay, bye.
Bye for now, and we'll see you next time.